everybody. Welcome to the Arts Council of Princeton's In Conversation program. I'm Maria Evans. I'm the Artistic Director for the Arts Council. And tonight we have a very good show. We are featuring Robin Resch, photographer and our current artist in resident. She'll be talking about past work and the project that she's working on and will be debuted this spring. She will be interviewed by Tim Andrews, and Tim is a very dear friend to the Arts Council. He's been on our board, he's been on McCarter's board, he's very involved in the arts, he's an art lover, art supporter, and he generously supports our Artist in Resident program. So I did want to give a thank you to Princeton Future for helping to support this project, and also to the Princeton University Humanities Council. So thank you very much. And we have a lot to cover tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to Tim and Robin, and I will get out of here, and I hope everyone enjoys the show.
Great, thank you so much, Maria. So Robin, it's a pleasure to spend some time together this evening. Thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you so much for your support of the Arts Council and this residency.
Well, it's a great place and great programming for people of all ages, and we're blessed to have you involved with us this year as well. So let's get started. So let's rewind the tape to the beginning. So tell us about where you were born and you know where you were raised and what your home life was like, and sort of what happened back in the beginning.
Back in the beginning, I was born in Brooklyn. Both of my parents went to Pratt, actually. My dad is an architect. My mom was trained as an illustrator. And they went on to have a family of 5 kids. So they moved out of the city, moved to Connecticut. So I grew up in Connecticut in a town called Wilton. And we grew up in a big, wonderful house with a lot of animals and friends and people from all over the world who came and felt comfortable there. And yeah, that's where I started. Go ahead.
And so what kind of illustrator was your mother?
She worked for different magazines, and then once she started having kids, it was, you know, she basically concentrated on us, but she was the most creative of moms. I mean, really amazing. She would make everything for us, like Halloween costumes, puppets, all sorts of puppets that we would use at school. She also was an incredible cook and did everything by scratch, you know, at home.
So someone just asked if you can speak up a little bit, because I think the audio is maybe a little, so just as a good message. Okay. And so is your mom the person that sort of inspired you to start art and photography?
I think both of my parents, as well as my maternal grandmother. She was a cartoonist, my mom's mom. And yeah, my mom also, both of my parents also took a lot of images, a lot of photography. They had a Super 8 camera, so they were filming everything that was going on in this crazy house. And my mom was also a great photographer, you know, but it was very much the stuff that was going on around the household and this place that we grew up.
And so when did you first have a camera in your hand that you remember? And you know,
sorry to interrupt, but I mean, even when they were at Pratt, they bought some old Leicas. You know? So they were going around with beautiful cameras and taking basically, I think, black and white and slide film, just constantly. Yeah.
And so the first camera in your hand, do you remember what the occasion was, or what you know generated your interest in photography, other than your family's engagement in it? It sounds like, you know, at a very young age.
Yeah. When I was 16, I was given a camera for my 16th birthday. At that point, I had saved up a bunch of money. I was planning on traveling that summer in Europe with a friend, a family friend. And I believe, if memory serves, it was given to me as something, for the birthday, but also for the travel. And it became something very important whenever I traveled, to always have my camera and to be taking pictures that were meaningful that I could share with my family.
And then did you go to Pratt like your parents, or where did you go to school?
No, I went undergrad to the University of Michigan and then graduate school here in Princeton.
Mhm.
So
And
that's how
undergrad
I came to Princeton.
was undergrad
University
art?
of Michigan,
Oh,
sorry, art history.
mhm.
Yeah.
And then you found your way to Princeton.
Yep, I found my, well, it took me a little while. I went other places along the way.
Where were the
Uh,
other places? Were you doing photography in the other places? What was
So before I went undergrad, though, I did a year abroad with a program called AFS. And in that, so after high school and before college, I did this year abroad, and I could have gone anywhere in the world, basically. And then they sort of try to match you with families in countries. But you don't find out until, or at least when I did this program, until about 2 weeks before you leave. So I could have gone to South America, I could have gone to Africa, could have gone anywhere, and I ended up getting Italy. So I hit the jackpot.
Oh, great.
And on top of that, I got the Italian jackpot. I was placed with a really amazing family in Turin, Italy, and a family of contemporary artists. So that was a very amazing year for me.
And so did you study Italian? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No.
So did you study Italian art while you were there, or what was the study during that year?
Well, so it's an exchange program. So the idea is that you just assimilate as best as possible. And because I had been in high school, I had to go to high school there. And they placed me in Liceo Scientifico, which is scientific high school, which they said was the equivalent of the American high school. But in reality, I wanted to be in the artistic high school. And they did. They actually, the people organizing the program said, no, you can't do that. You don't have the right background. You should be in the scientific high school. And then I got there, and it was really not a very great situation for me, because they were in the 5th year of Dante, and it was very specific. So then my Italian mother, she encouraged me to do a strike until they placed me in the artistic high school. So we went on it, like, she's like, you're going to be a good Italian and do a strike. So I struck until I could go to the artistic high school.
That's great. And so
Yeah.
were you studying photography, or were you studying fine art, or what were you studying?
There we were making, it was whatever they were doing. It was drawing. It was, I forget what they call it. It was like modeling with clay. I made this wonderful foot that my Italian father kept as a doorstop. Huh. It looked like, you had to copy Roman sculptures and stuff like that. It was a wide range of things.
So that was before undergrad, or that was during undergrad?
No, that was before undergrad. So that was between high school and college.
Mm-hmm.
And
so then after undergrad, did you immediately go into grad school, or you sort of had some life that happened before?
I had some life that happened, yeah. So I had always wanted to study architecture. It was this thing, because my father's an architect. I think it's just part of my DNA. Mm-hmm. And it was something that I considered doing undergrad, but didn't do. And so instead, actually, after being in Italy for a year, I decided to study art history undergrad. I felt it was the best study for me to do that encompassed the most things that were interesting to me. So culturally, artistically, and linguistically. But then as I was finishing, I was like, I'm not going to be an art historian. I knew I wasn't going to follow that path. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go back to design. So at that point, I was thinking of going into fashion design, and got myself into a design school in Paris. And then my parents talked some sense into me and said, well, why don't you just try a job in fashion first and see how it goes? And so that's what I did. I went from undergrad to New York, where I got some positions in the fashion field. And that was very interesting. It helped me immediately decide that wasn't the path I wanted to go down. So,
were you doing design, or were you creating things, or were you?
The first job was with Adrienne Vittadini, who's a sportswear designer, and I was hired as her left-hand man, so her creative assistant, basically. But it was sort of I don't know, it was sort of a superfluous job, really. I mean, I did various creative tasks for her, but I wasn't a designer. Yeah, and then the market crashed, And then so they decided it was sort of a very superfluous job. And then I actually got a job at Karl Lagerfeld, and I was there were just two of us working there. So it was my boss and myself running everything for Lagerfeld in the United States. And then from there, I went on to Escada. Somebody who had worked with Vittadini took me with her to Escada, basically, to do marketing there.
And
so it was pretty quick.
And at what point did you decide that this was all not for you and you went on to the next thing?
Well, well, that was actually pretty interesting. I had a really good job at Escada. It was very, very diverse. But at that point, then I met the person who I ended up marrying, who was European. This is the father of my kids, and he
Italian?
had been Belgian, and he was the program director for PS1 in New York. So when he was hired for a position in Holland to actually start a contemporary art space. So at that point, then I decided to leave what I was doing in New York and to go to Holland.
And how long were you in Holland?
For almost a decade, about 9 years. Yeah.
And is that where your children were born, or your son?
Yeah, both of my children were born there. Yep, yep. And there I picked up my photography much more and took it very seriously, and really did it on my own. I had my own dark room and was working, doing a lot of different things, but not in the way that I've been, it was working as an artist, creating my own art.
And then when did you come back to the United States?
In about 98. Yeah. So after both of my kids were born, then we came back, and at that point I decided to study architecture and to go back to school.
And why
That's how I came to Princeton.
Yeah, so why Princeton? Obviously it's a great architecture school, but why did you select Princeton? Had you been here before, or was it a new place?
No, I'd never been to the town. No. Why Princeton? Because it offered the most comprehensive sort of thing for all of us. I had two little kids. They needed to be in school, and my other options were in big cities like Boston and New Haven. So trickier situations to work out. And then Princeton's also very small program, and they were very, very generous. So they made it very attractive to come here. But it was really the whole picture. And also that they were understanding that I had little kids, and that they were supportive of that. Though the education is very theoretical. And so initially it was like, oh, I don't know. I kind of would rather have a more practical architectural education. But in hindsight, it was fabulous. It was absolutely the best possible place I could have landed.
And were you still doing a lot of photography during that period, or were you so focused on your family and bringing kids up and being in a new city? And
No. I was always taking pictures.
A lot. Sounds like a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was really always taking pictures in different ways, and so in Holland, definitely making my own art. And then after my son was born, just being fascinated by this person who was with me all the time. I mean, he was just so fascinating and fun. And yeah, and then that just kind of went from there. And I continued to always work with photography throughout Princeton. And Princeton, being a more theoretical school, was very open to that and very encouraging. I could kind of create my own study in a way. And then I was lucky enough at Princeton I didn't realize he was teaching here, but M. McGowan was teaching at Princeton, and he is an incredible photographer. And he was the head of the Viz Arts department when I was there, and the School of Architecture let me study with him as well. So I kind of combined things, so which I didn't anticipate coming in, but it worked out that way.
And how long are you in the program? How long is that program, and the pace that you took it?
The master's program is a 3-year program.
So were you thinking, I'm going to be an architect when I get out and I'm going to design buildings, or what were you thinking about the architecture
Well,
role in studying architecture, and what was going to be the next step after school?
when I applied to graduate school, I actually wrote, I want the education, but not necessarily the profession. So, meaning, I really wanted, I think, the toolbox and the awareness and the knowledge base of architecture. Wasn't sure I wanted, and I love design. I love architecture, but I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to balance all of that with being a single parent. So, yeah.
And were you thinking
And
that was going to be combined with your photography in some sort of way? So understanding and looking at structure and thinking about the architecture of what you are seeing through your lens, and then sort of bringing that to your photography. Was that part of the equation for you, you think, or no?
I think they inform each other all the time. It wasn't a conscious decision, though. I don't think in the moment it wasn't like I felt I needed architecture to inform my photography. I was just doing these two creative, there are two creative sides to me, and expressing myself in different ways. But my thesis at Princeton was both photographic and architectural. It was on strip malls. That's a whole other discussion.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did sort of this series of images of the alienating space of strip malls. And then the design thesis was about how to repurpose them as Greyfield sites.
You were ahead of your time in terms of repurposing malls and strip malls.
I was, and nobody else was talking about strip malls when I was doing it. But yeah, no, it was a great thesis, and it's an incredible education. I mean, it really, really is. And maybe I was open to it too, going back to Italy. In Italy, it's very normal to study architecture. A lot of people study it. You have certain areas that you can go into, sort of in terms of educations. So people like Giorgio Armani, he studied architecture. It wasn't really a fashion school that he went to. But,
so you're out of the program. What happens then? And we're going to start looking at some of your images in just a couple of minutes here. So you leave the program, and what happens?
So my kids at that point were, I guess, getting further along. My son was maybe in 3rd grade, and my daughter was probably in kindergarten. And they lobbied me to stay in Princeton. They were afraid I would go to New York. They were pretty sure I was going to get an architectural job in New York. And it just made, it was in their situation, it was the most comfortable, and it was the path of least resistance in a way, because everybody was happy. And it was such a welcoming community for us to be in. So we stayed. And I just felt at that point my best option was to create my own studio as a place where I could do photography and then build in architecture or design projects, but have some independence through the photography. Because I've been doing it all the way through, and doing it as well throughout Princeton when I was studying. So like side gigs to make some money, or because people kept asking me. And it seemed like the best way to be independent. So, and that was the most important to me at that point, to be able to balance my time so I could do everything. Working for somebody else would have been nice and great, but when I was in my early 30s, I had 2 kids, when you're working for an architectural firm, they're very demanding, the hours that you put in there. And I just figured I was better off strengthening my own position for myself versus depending on somebody else. So that was my thinking. I don't know if it was right or not, but that's what I did.
Well, let's look at some images. I'm going to now share my screen here in just a second. And while I'm doing this, as a reminder, if anyone has any questions for Robin, you can either put them in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll be checking both of those as we go along, and I'll be asking them, as we're progressing, or ask them at the end, depending on what happens. So let's switch now to share here. So with any luck there, you see an angry little girl. So why don't you talk to us about this image?
Well, so this is a early commission. So I thought you were going to, sorry to interrupt, but I thought you were going to start with older images. You want to start with this one?
Yeah, let's start with this one.
Okay. So This was one of my first commission clients, was a family in New York City, actually. The father was a big music exec, and their daughter was born deaf. So interesting thing, music was in their family, and she was deaf. And this picture actually comes after an earlier picture of her, but they wanted me to take portraits of her while she was still deaf. They were going to do cochlear implants, and they wanted a portrait of her while she still was deaf. And that this one's later on, a couple of years later. So I documented her for a while. This progress of gaining a sense of the world around her and hearing. So you can see the little strap around her is actually her hearing aid, but there's a shot from before where it's just her feet on the ground. So I had to take a picture or make a telling portrait of this 2-year-old who was this one. Yeah, that's from I guess 2 years prior to that. She was 2, and very determined. And this was the stance, that I felt she was expressing at that time.
So, we probably have some photographers or people who like to capture images, in the this discussion this evening. Sort of, how did you make a 2-year-old girl feel comfortable, with somebody that's, taking photos and they don't know you and they're hearing impaired in some sort of way? How did you make that person feel at ease?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's really about how you are with people, how you communicate your expressions, you smile. It was a wonderful experience, really, working with her. I loved it when she was deaf, and I loved it as she gained her sense of ability to be able to communicate with me in a different way. But yeah, it was definitely challenging, but fun. You express yourself differently, I guess.
So let's switch to another image here.
So this is jumping in time. This is from installation at NRG that was ended last year, so 2019, and this is from the Big Sur River. So it's a triptych of 3 panel pieces or 3 pieces in a row of the Big Sur River. And that was a series of images. These 2 are also from the Big Sur River that were images that I took when I was traveling across country for this portrait project that I've been working on. So I met with, we're going all over. So this is an earlier picture from when I was actually studying at Princeton. And this is a girl who I just took my kids up to you can see the fountain up at Wilson School. And that's just a friend of theirs who's sitting there. And it's a portrait I really, really like. It really was the only picture I took of her, I think, ever, but I love it.
So many of these portraits, I mean, and we're going to go through quite a few, especially in the project called Taking Pause that you've been so focused on for the last little while. I think you have an incredible way of capturing someone and making them appear that they were so at ease. And I found that with the little girl before, and then this little girl, it's really astonishing. So many of us struggle, with taking photos of even our best friends, and of ourselves now in selfies, I suppose, right? To sort of look natural, I'll call it. But was this simply a snap, or was this a pose, or do you recall, how you?
No, she wasn't posing. No, that was the only. I was shooting only film then. It was just the only image I took of her. I have another image I took of this girl, maybe from 4 months later when she was with a friend outside of my apartment. But no, this was it. She just turned around and looked at me, and I don't remember really the moment, except that it was so beautiful. And I love her confidence. And this is also an image I've always loved. So the previous little girl was a friend of my children, and I'd just taken everybody swimming, but this was a commissioned portrait of a family up in Westchester. And that family, very much like the other girl who was deaf, I worked with them many times over the years. So I got to know their children as they grew. But this little moment, she put on a special dress, and I think the older sister is running off in the distance. And I just love the energy of these two sisters. And then the light, it sums up that little girl for me.
And in what period of your path here have you typically, focused on black and white versus color, and sort of how do you make that decision for the work you're doing?
Well, in the beginning, I was, shooting black and white and developing it myself, and that was part of a process. But even when I used travel through Europe, I would always have slide film with me, and travel with slides, because the color was so important in travel. This image, now we're going to an early commission piece. This was after, I was still at Princeton. And this is a woman who made, she's in Princeton, and she had, her son and my son were in kindergarten together. And I guess she'd seen some of my photographs, but she no longer has this business, but a sachet sort of company of making these wonderful, very creative sachets. And she asked me if I could take pictures for her company for a press release, I think. And it was just this fabulous place. And the images were really beautiful. So I happen to love this image because I think here's an example of color, right? The color is so strong and it's so beautiful. But then this image, it resonated for a lot of people. And it actually, she ended up getting, Victoria magazine said they wanted to do a profile on her because of this image. Or I don't know if it was necessarily this image, but then they said, but we want that photographer also. So this led to a job with Victoria magazine. And then from there was actually someone who saw Victoria magazine and asked me to do a travel book to Italy. So this one image sort of took on a life of its own. And I've always loved it. I love the colors and the richness of it.
It's really beautiful. I mean, it's really an incredibly beautiful. So obviously this needed to be in color because it's a beautiful image. And so back to my question on black and white and color. So how do you decide, I mean, this obviously is something that I think would be color, just given the richness of the image and what you were trying to accomplish. But with people, do you prefer one over the other, or how do you make that decision?
Well, it just sort of depends on the circumstances and where you are and all of that. When I was shooting film, basically for the most part, my portraits I was doing in black and white, unless someone wanted color. Now, lately, I've been working mainly with digital, so you can go either way. But it's so interesting to see, even if you've shot something in color, and you take away the color, what the image is, because you focus on it different. It's a different focus, I think. You see things differently. So this was shot film. This is my daughter. And this, again, was an image for me that was just a beautiful moment that was very telling. So for me, a photograph doesn't need to be sharp or in focus. I like that sense of motion. I think it speaks to the passing of time. I mean, it was also me realizing how fleeting this precious time was that I had with my kids. And here she's going down a slide, actually. I don't know if you can tell about this. She's just, and the swinging of her hair. Yeah. So for me, that was a portrait of her at that. I have many pictures of her, though, at that time. So this is from also the show at NRG. This is in White Sands Memorial. So one of the national parks that I went to when I was out there. traveling across the country.
Great. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I thought I had another photo that we were going to show. So I'm going to look for that, the Zorro photo. So I need to find Zorro for sure. Let's go back and we've got a few questions that have come in, and one that I want to take now, I think. How do you recharge yourself as an artist, and what do you do for self-care? Interesting question.
Oh, I wonder who asked that question. Good question. I think being outside in nature is my best way of recharging. For me, also seeing new things, and it could be anywhere. It could either be walking down the block here in Princeton. It could be walking on campus. It could be over at the Institute Woods. It could be going into New York. I'm a visual person. I like to see things. So walking around and looking is probably my most, curative thing that I do.
Okay, let's talk about this new project that you have undertaken, I guess a couple of years ago, or I think you started a couple of years ago, Taking Pause. Give us the background on sort of, what's the project about? How did it come to be? And it's very, the coincidence that it occurred during, a few months before the pandemic, and sort of how it sort of led. But let's start in the very beginning. So how did you get the idea, and tell people about the idea? Some people probably know, but tell us a bit more about that project.
Okay. Well, Taking Pause is a portrait project where I felt I wanted to see if I could take a meaningful portrait of a person through something that was important to them. So, meaning, could I take a portrait of a person and represent them through something else? And then the idea was to make a portrait of the person themselves, and then what they shared with me, this second portrait, which I call a reflective portrait. So this was the idea, and I basically thought about it. I talked to a bunch of different people who I respected and whose opinions I bounced ideas off of to see if this was an interesting project. And the question, so as I kind of evolved it, I honed in on the question to ask as, what is irreplaceable to you? Because this isn't a project about what is the one thing that you take with you in a fire. It was trying to get to something a little bit deeper than that, and more reflective than that. And so that was sort of the original question that I asked. And then I started with 8 people, more or less, on the East Coast in different locations, and to see, if this really was interesting, and if I could tease out an interest, a portrait that felt meaningful. And it just seemed to work. So I started to build on it from there. But this was back in 2018. Started actually in 2017 that I started kind of putting it all together. And then early 2018, I started to work with some people locally.
And how did you find your first, how did you find your first, you mentioned, I think you started working with 8 people. How did you find your first, subjects?
They're not subjects. I call them participants.
Participants.
Yeah, because I see a subject as someone who is, in my mind, I don't want anyone to be, for this project, a passing subject. So the idea is that they're actively engaged in it with me. And so the first people were some of these people that I'd reached out to for feedback, to say, okay, I'm thinking of doing this, and I'm thinking of doing it as a project where I travel around the country. And am I crazy? I mean, it's kind of a crazy thing to go away for 4 months and then, kind of put everything on hold. But I was really driven to it also because I felt like everything was, our country was divided. I felt like we're in this really mistrusting place. I think that's one way of saying it. And so it was and that people weren't taking the time to be together. And that's you know, or everything was too busy. Everything was, I don't know. Those are some of the impulses, but and then so the first participants that I worked with were some of these people that I've been speaking to. So who were either in the art world or various roles. And so they were, but as diverse people who I thought would take me seriously
Mhm.
and help me to build it as a project. So because part of what I asked people, besides thinking about this question and being taking it seriously, is to tell me about it and then also to write something as well. So and then in addition to that, to connect me to somebody else. So to help build this project in a meaningful way.
So they were referring you to the next participant that they thought might
Right.
be.
Yes, and that referring me to the next participant is also, in a way, you know, helping me go to the next. What's the best way to describe it? You know, trusting that I'm going to be going to somebody who might be interesting for this, and also who will engage in it. So that was part of it.
Okay, so let's
And
we're going, and then you went on the road. So you did the 8 locally, and that was sort of beginning in 17, 18. And then when did you actually decide to do the trip, and what part of the America did you sort of drive through? And I'm now going to share a screen with some of the images. We'll start talking about the actual images as well.
okay, so when I first started this, I thought, okay, well, this will be interesting to start with a participant and then move, you know, from participant to participant and go around the country. And then when I go all the way around the country, I will have finished the project. But then I began to realize that I was biting off probably a bigger project than I was going to be able to manage at that time frame that I had. So I decided to do a southern loop around the United States. And so my 8 original participants, you know, I just said, I'm going to aim to go roughly, get over to California, go up as far as I can in California, and then come back on the southerly route. And who do you know along the way? So that's pretty much how I got started. And then my route was determined by the people that I was working with. So
here's here's a participant. So I think you see this?
I can.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure. So who is this gentleman? What's his story?
This is Charlie, and he's in Knickerbocker, Texas. So, and do you want me to tell you about Charlie, or?
Whatever you'd like to share about the image and about why you selected him and sort of what.
Well, because he was so powerful. I mean, he really went through a lot. He lost both of his hands in an electrical accident. He was a welder by trade and lost in a horrific accident. And then after that, he ended up losing also his, just a long story, but he lost his family and people who he felt, you know, close to. He came from a very small community. But within all of this, he struggled to get back. And the people who, you know, he didn't really know necessarily were the ones who supported him the most. So he was very, very powerful. So, so what he chose as his irreplaceable is friendship. And this is what we agreed together represented that the best. And this is, they did a donation, an auction for him to raise money so to help pay his medical bills, which were crazy. I mean, he'd gone through a lot. I think he was in the hospital for at least 4 months.
And so how much time have you typically spent with the participants like Charlie?
It depended on the person. So in a lot of, so the basic concept that I had set up for this was, when possible, that I would stay with people and then really spend a little bit of time with them. So, and depending on the person, whatever their availability was, So there was this a time period, I'm asking people to share something that is possibly personal and meaningful, and not necessarily I'm asking them to trust me with what they share.
Mhm.
And they are trusting me. So part of this process of traveling and spending time with people is also to show, that I trust them. And so this is, to me, that was the main focus of this in terms of the way it was set up, is to show this mutual vulnerability and trust.
Mhm.
Um,
Personal.
and it depended just on the person and their time, how much I spent, but sorry?
It's incredibly personal. I mean, all the photos that you captured in the series thus far are so incredibly personal with each person. I mean, you're in their space and you're hearing about their life, and also hearing the answer to that very important question of what's irreplaceable.
Right.
Um,
So this woman is Dolores, and she's in Cimarron, New Mexico. And I was connected to her by her nephew in New York. And she was amazing. But she chose, without going into her whole story, her trailer as being irreplaceable, because she had gotten married when she was 13, and she married at 13 because she felt she was too poor to be able to afford to go to the prom. It's like that wasn't going to be an option for her, so why not get married? But she chose the trailer because it was a place of memories, and where she saw all of her girls go to the prom, dressed in their prom dresses to go to prom. This is Edward, and he is a musician and a painter and an actor in Los Angeles. And he has a collection of custom guitars, like a huge collection of custom guitars. And he plays them in this space. And his story is also really beautiful. But yeah, it's the guitars that make him happy. He dealt with a certain number of a bunch of sadness. He lost his father to cancer, his mother had schizophrenia, but the guitars made him happy. But he also, so the painting behind him is one of his paintings.
so he's also an artist. This is a self-portrait, I assume.
I don't know I don't think that's a self-portrait. No, it just happens to be in this space. But yeah, I mean, he just has all these different things that he does, his creative things. That's his favorite guitar. The one that he got, I think, when I don't remember how old, but maybe in high school. It's the one, they had the whole association with a certain person who ran the music shop. I mean, there's a lot of memory that goes into these images, because basically what people were choosing as being irreplaceable often has to do with memory and remembering somebody else, who was seminal. So in this case, he was losing so much in terms of his family, and I think it was this man who ran the music store who really pulled him through. And this guitar was that moment. But behind him are all the other guitars in that space.
And as you're asking people this question, you're spending all this time with them in their space, and I guess making an introduction to yourself through their through the person who's referred them. How much thought do they give, and what do you observe as their process for being able to answer your question? Is that a snap answer, or is it a or does it vary by person? Because since we started talking. I'm sorry?
No, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, since we've been talking and preparing for this conversation, I've been thinking about the answer myself, and so what have you observed of people and their process of answering that question?
It depends on the person. So for some people, it's a little harder. to answer the question. You know, it takes a little contemplation. And so say there's a person in New York who it took maybe 6 months before he was comfortable with being able to speak to me. And then he did, because he said he understood that the project was about trust, and that then he could express himself and could share with me. Other people, it's immediate, they just know. Many people, you know, that I've been working with recently here in Princeton, and also when I was traveling, they hadn't really ever asked themselves this question. And I have to say, it's not something that I would have normally have asked myself either, I don't think. It was much more in creating this portrait series that I came to the question. And it was a question generated really about trying to help get a deeper portrait. But I didn't anticipate how much people would appreciate it. So many people have been very thankful to be asked this question. It was like, I never really thought about that. Now, so basically to answer, some people, they'll kick it around for about a week or so, you know, and kind of go back and forth and start to fine tune it. And then, you know, in talking, then you sort of understand in that conversation what they really mean. So it really depends on the person and what they're going through.
And so who's this gentleman, this participant?
This is Paul, and he was the doorman at the Troubadour nightclub in Los Angeles for many, many years. And so I was connected to him by somebody in Tennessee. And so he was at the Troubadour, and for him, it was immediate. He knew exactly. Music and travel was for him, everything. And so so then it becomes a process of how do we represent that, you know, and this is his jukebox. And for him, the jukebox is also part of travel, right? When you go around different places, music travels with you if you go to a jukebox. But it's not as if this one jukebox is irreplaceable to him. He's had many, but his collection of music that's inside of that jukebox is irreplaceable. Yeah, he was incredible. He is incredible. He really witnessed everything in terms of what happened at that place, the Troubadour.
So I'm going to go now to a very important topic, which is you're the artist in residence at the Arts Council of Princeton, and have been for a bit. So tell us how you're going to bring the Taking Pause project and you know, Dome Alley. And for those of you who don't know, the work's going to be in some work's going to be in Dome Alley, which is a space, sort of a long, narrow alleyway space outdoors between a retail store and the Starbucks in downtown Princeton. And so tell us, you know, how you first came in contact with the Arts Council and started the Artist in Residence, and sort of what do we have to look forward to in that very special space in downtown Princeton?
Okay. Well, so I guess the Arts Council, Maria first, she knew about this project when I was traveling. And so she had asked if she could present some of these images when I was on the road. So they were, a couple of the first portraits were on display at the Arts Council. I guess it was about 2 years ago. And then at some point this spring, he reached out to me to see if I would be interested in working on this in the context of everything that we've been going through this past year. And so that's where the residency came from. You know, we started talking about it and trying to figure out, okay, you know, I want to continue this work, and how are you going to do it and make it meaningful for the community right now? Because so to be an artist in residence, but not in residence, I'm not in the Arts Council. But so what I've been doing is continuing Taking Pause locally. Very, very important conversation that I had after I started speaking to Arts Council was to talk to Liz Lempert, our mayor, our former mayor, who really, you know, was on the pulse of everything we had to deal with last year. and then trying to get a sense of how to make this a meaningful project in terms of what we've gone through collectively. So, because we've had all sorts of, there's obviously the pandemic, a health crisis, economic crisis, social and racial reckoning, political. It's been a heavy year for all of us. So, and then since I've been an artist in residence, I've been working with a number of different people in town to create portraits. And so I've now, at this stage of the residency, I've completed the portraits in the sense that I've done the work of making the portraits, and now we'll put it all together so they'll be displayed in Dome Alley as banners. I don't know if you've been seeing them around town or on the university campus. They have these beautiful banners, but in the alleyway, we will have banners that come into the alley and invite people to participate. My hope, because what will be on display is very contemplative, and I'm hoping that it will be a reflective, contemplative space for people to come and to see these images and to read what people have shared, and that we can heal in a way in that space and communicate.
So during this COVID time, how have you been enlisting participants and interacting with them? How did that change what you were doing, and how have you been working through that challenge? And I have to say, the name Taking Pause, which was that the name in 2017 when you started this project, or?
It's always been Taking Pause, yeah.
Incredibly, considering that we've all really in many ways have taken a pause in our lives, the name, is so, reflective of what we've all been living through for the last really almost 12 months to the day.
Right, I know. For me at the time, Taking Pause was asking people to slow down, spend some time with me. Let's be reflective. Let's, let's just slow down and think about things, and it was hard at that time, to get people to kind of slow down in many respects. Whereas, so yeah, the name was always there, and it's true. This past year, we've all sort of been forced to take pause. But how did I work through? It was a very different process, right? Because I couldn't be with people in the same way. So it was initially sometimes outreach by email, and then speaking by phone, and then having a Zoom, sort of a real, long conversation via Zoom, and then establishing where it made sense to work in person, and in a way that would be safe for everybody involved. So it depended on the person, their comfort level, and what matters, what they chose as irreplaceable, or all the circumstances, where we decided to do the portraits. I've been working with a mask, N95 mask, and so that it's just which isn't ideal, but it is part of what I had to do this. And yeah.
We have a few questions that I want to take, and I just want to remind people, if you have questions, sort of pop them into the Q&A or into the chat, either one. What have been some of the most challenging aspects about the project, and what have been some of the most inspiring parts of the project?
Let's see. Challenging, I don't know if challenging is the right word. Well, it's, you have to let go of expectations. You can't, and that's one thing that I've learned that I really love about this project, that it grows, each person brings it to some other place. But you need to know you can't control everything, right? Especially as I was traveling around the country, I didn't know if something was going to work out or not. And if it didn't, you have to let go of it. And then otherwise, I've grown so much from all the people that I've met and what people share with me and the conversations that I've had. I learn every single time.
So intimate. Portraits are so intimate. What is your answer to your question of what's irreplaceable?
Empathy.
Hmm.
For me, it's empathy. And actually, I have my
Yeah.
little,
How do you represent that?
it's a little heart rock. I
Oh,
don't know if you can see,
yeah.
but it was something that my son gave me when he was little. He found it outside somewhere, and it represents,
Hmm.
me, both of my kids. I kept it with me my whole trip. It's always in my pocket.
That's awesome.
I'd say it's empathy. Sometimes I say trust, both empathy and trust, and I don't know if there's a word that's between the two of them,
Hmm.
but ultimately, I think empathy is what really is super important. Is for me as a person,
Mhm.
and then also for me in terms of how I work and to be able to do the portraits I'm doing.
And to build that trust that you have to have with people. I mean, it's such an intimate situation. And speaking of your son, one final piece of your work
Find it.
here tonight. Yes,
There he is.
there he is. And it's great that you brought your son up. It was perfect timing. Thank you very much. I was trying to figure out how I was going to bring Zorro into the picture here. So that was a perfect segue for me.
Yeah.
So tell us about this incredibly cute photo. And he was ahead of his time in terms of his, because he's in his early 20s now, I think you said. So he's
27. Yeah.
early. He was early in the mask world. He didn't have it over his nose and his mouth.
Yeah, I know. It's too funny, right? I wasn't thinking about the mask.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was definitely ahead of the curve. No, he would dress up a lot as a little kid, but this was for me the moment that I really realized the power of a portrait, and that I wanted to do something with it. Portraiture to me is so powerful, and yeah, so that's what it is.
That's great. It's an awesome
He
photo.
would wear for a year. He would always go cross-eyed just to drive me crazy. And then so he was going cross-eyed and Zorro. And then he just had that. But this image, I shared it because you wanted to know a little bit about my history, and this single image has just been very memorable, and so I've stuck with it. It's been, people love it on a business card. They hold on to it. They put it on a shelf.
Yeah, it's an awesome image. Awesome.
Yeah.
We have a couple of last questions before we ask Marie to come back on. Will you be utilizing the AV equipment that was intended for video and sound in the alley? And that was used for a while. I don't know whether it's, I don't know whether it's still there or not, but do you have any intention to use that AV equipment?
Well, I don't know that it's actually available to us.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that wasn't something that we discussed as a possibility. We would love to be able to have some lights so that the space is inviting at night and that people can see things. I don't know enough. We're going to be meeting there tomorrow morning to go over signage and finalize some stuff. So
Great.
yeah, I'm very excited about this space. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity to connect between the town and also the university and the students and everybody who's there. So I'm hoping that with the banners will be very inviting and welcoming.
Yeah, it's been that such space is such an awesome space, and it's been so sort of well, curated over its couple of year life. It's going to be great to have it reinvigorated and brought back to life. And I hope there's some lighting. There's people here who know about the AV equipment, so that maybe the person who asked the question is an anonymous attendee. So if they know about the AV equipment for video and sound, I'm sure that if they could reach out to Marie or someone, that would be great. And one last question from the audience, I think it's the last one. How do you decide to frame a photo or not? And do you use just black frames?
No, I do different things. I don't always frame pictures. So some are printed on metal, like everything I did for the Nassau Club or NRG. Those were printed on brushed aluminum, and they mount and they float off the wall. I've done other images around my house that are face mounted on plexiglass, and they're also frameless. So, and if but if a picture needs a frame does set off an image in a beautiful way. Typically, if I use a frame, it's a dark wood, almost a walnut, not quite black, with a mat. I mean, it's very classic, very classically framed, 8-ply mat. Yeah.
Okay, great. And we do have one last question. Do you see yourself taking this worldwide? This the Taking Pause project.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, it's a project that at first I thought I was going to do it, just around, and when I finished going around the United States, I'd be done with it. But then I just realized, especially now working on it here locally in the pandemic, that it's a question that is, what is irreplaceable to you, is a question that we can always ask ourselves and always tap into. And as an artist, I keep learning every day. Every time I work with someone, my portraiture, I think, gets better. Or maybe I shouldn't want to, but I feel like I've added something else to what I do. And I would love to be able to just keep doing this. And I can see that happening. I mean, it will do more in the United States and then keep going.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Maria can come back, and as she's coming back, one final question from someone. Will the installation be videoed as it is enjoyed by the public, and will that be on the internet?
That's a good question. There was some talk with the Humanities Council about that, but I don't know for sure what's going to be a possibility. But what do you think, Maria? Maybe we should let you jump in on that one.
Yeah, hi. We spoke about that last week. There was some talk about making a video of the installation in Dome Alley so that it can be live on our website and people could view it that way. So that's a definite possibility. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Robin. It's been really a great hour. It's flown by really fast. Your work is incredible. I can't wait to see it in Dome Alley, and congratulations on being an artist in residence. And for everyone who's listening, I would just remind you that this is an Arts Council of Princeton project. We need your help and your support. So artscouncilofprinceton.org. Donations of any size and contributions are always accepted and readily, devoured for other projects. So we're eager to have you participate in that way as well. And again, Robin, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tim and Robin. I just have a couple of closing remarks. That we have a new show in our gallery that opens this Saturday with Lainey Morante and Susan DiConcini, Textured Waters. Please stop by and see that. Two beautiful painters. And then exactly a week from today, we're having a program called The Art of the Perfect Cup. And we have had the pleasure of getting behind the scenes of Small World Coffee. And our director has thrown these beautiful mugs, which you can have as your own to drink the coffee. There's only 4 of these guys left, so you got to act fast. And you can learn about that on our website. But do come and see us in Dome Alley. We will be installing Robin's Taking Pause project mid-April, and it will run through October. So I think that's going to be a really great, very energized section in town with outdoor seating on Witherspoon. You can walk over and cross Hamilton and Jewelers and go right down the alley and come through the alley and see our new mural in the spring right on Spring Street. So a lot of exciting things going on. Tim, thank you so much for being our gracious host once again. And I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks you so much.